Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I would like to welcome you all to the second virtual public hearing of the Joint Select Committee on Human Rights, Equality, and Diversity inquiry. And what we're looking at this morning is the underachievement of schools in Port of Spain and Environs area. Inquiry into the right to equal access to education, with specific focus on the underachievement of schools in the Port of Spain and Environs district with respect to performance in terminal examinations. And those of you who have been following our inquiries, you realize that on the last occasion, we dealt with the position in primary schools. And today, we will be looking at secondary schools. This is a virtual meeting, and there are certain specific guidelines that would apply, including make sure you mute your microphone when you are not speaking to help keep background noise to a minimum. Adjust your camera so that your face is clearly visible, and ensure that notifications from your cell phone or any other electronic device in your vicinity are muted during the course of the meeting. We invite members of the listening and viewing audience to post or send your comments via the Parliament's various social media platforms, Facebook page, ParlView, and the Parliament YouTube channel and Twitter. Now, I would like to invite representatives of your organizations to introduce themselves. So we start with the Ministry of Education, please.
Good morning, Madam Chair. I am Lisa Henry David, Acting Chief Education Officer. And this morning, I am accompanied by Ms. Naima Hussain, Director of School Supervision and Management, Mrs. Anna Singh, Director of Curriculum Planning and Development, and Ms. Natalie Robinson Arnold, Social Work Specialist.
Mr. Ford, maybe we could ask Mr. Ford to just step in for Senator Thompson. He who may be having some connectivity issues. Mr. Ford, could you?
Okay, no problem, Madam Minister.
I think the other
continued introductions until the substantive chairman gets back online. We now go to the Trinidad and Tobago Unified Teachers Association, TTUTA.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Good morning, colleagues, members of the panel. My name is Antonia Tika de Freitas, President of TTUTA. I will be representing the association this morning. I would like to make an excuse for my colleague, Ms. Lisa Ibrahim Joseph, who is unwell and will not be participating. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now move on to the Association of Principals of Public Secondary Schools.
Good morning, everyone. My name is David Simon. I am the second vice president of APT, and I will be accompanied by Mr. Trisha, who is the secretary of APT. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much, Mr. Simon. We'll now move on to the officials of the association of Principals of Assisted Secondary Schools.
A pleasant good morning, everyone. My name is Sonia Mehes Basad. I'm the president of the Association of Principals of Assisted Secondary Schools. And joining me this morning is Mrs. Lucia Rez, who is the vice president of APAS.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mehes Basad. We now move on to Holy Ghost Fathers.
Hi, my name is Father Ron Mendez. I am the chairman of the Holy Ghost Fathers Board of Management.
Thank you very much. My name is Esmond Ford. I am acting in the absence presently of Senator Thompson-Ayi, who is probably having some internet connection. So we'll continue to move on. And I'll now invite other members of this committee in order to introduce themselves. Kindly proceed, members.
Good morning. My name is Kazim Hussein, member.
Hi, Nian Gadspadoli, substantive chairman of the committee, member for today.
Good morning, Shirley John, member.
Good morning, Barry Padarat, member.
Good morning, Donna Cox, member.
MP Morris. Is MP Morris still with us? Okay, well, thank you, members. We'll continue along. So again, as the substantive chair mentioned, the inquiry objectives are to determine the root causes for the underachievement of schools in the Port of Spain and Environs district. Madam Chair, you're back with us. 2, to examine methods to address the underachievement of schools in the Port of Spain and Environs district. I will now invite each official from the various entities with us today for brief opening remarks, again, not exceeding 1 minute. So I'll start with Ministry of Education.
Good morning again, and thank you, Mr. Chair. The Ministry of Education is heartened and happy to be here this morning as we explore this topic that is of great interest to us, and we would welcome the opportunity to have the feedback from all of our stakeholders in education so that we, in going forward, we can have a plan and a rollout so that we can ensure that all of our children are educated to the level that they can become productive citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you, Madam Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Chief Education Officer Acting. I will now move on to Trinidad and Tobago Unified Teachers Association. Brief opening comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As was said by the first speaker, TTUTA welcomes the opportunity to participate in this virtual hearing this morning and to share our perspectives from that of the education professional on the performance of students. We look forward to a robust discussion, and we hope after this hearing there will be follow-up activities that would allow us to engage further in the interests of our nation's children. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will now move on to Mr. David Simon, Second Vice President Acting, Association of Principals of Public Secondary Schools of Trinidad and Tobago.
A very good morning to everyone again, and the association looks forward to be involved in productive discussions on this subject matter. We hope as well that as a result of our discussions, there will be recommendations that will be put in place that will allow for improvement in all aspects of education in Trinidad and Tobago, not only as it applies education in terms of academic performance. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Simon. I will now move on to Mrs. Sonia Mahes Prasad, President, Association of Principals of Assisted Secondary Schools.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chair. APAS welcomes the opportunity to be part of this process, and we look forward to examining the educational philosophy that undergirds our system, not just at the secondary level, but throughout, and to make some meaningful contribution, to engage in some meaningful and in-depth discussion so that we could make some purposeful changes and to make our system more authentic to the needs of our greatest resource, our young people. So we look forward to this session.
Thank you very much. I will now move on to Father Ronald Mendez, CSSB, Chairman of the Holy Ghost Board of Management.
Thank you, Chair. I am very happy to be able to be here and to be part of this discussion. And it is my hope that the powers that be, both in the ministry and on this committee, will take action based on some of the things that will be said here today, because it seems as though very little action takes place. Thank you.
Mr. Ford, Member Ford.
Yes, Madam Chair, you're back with us?
I'm suggesting that because of the instability of the internet connection, because normally I would come to the office, I would ask you to carry on, because I wouldn't like the hearing to be delayed because of the in and out. But you know the reason that I'm unable to leave to come to the office.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Senator Thompson. And as we would have previously discussed, I shall proceed. Thank you. So, members, I would like to remind all committee members and officials to direct their questions and concerns through the chair. I would also like to remind all members that they are to activate their microphone on their devices when they are acknowledged by the chair, and to also be reminded to turn it off when they have concluded their various contributions. We will now proceed with the hearing as agreed. So as has been identified, right, we are here this morning in an inquiry into the right to equal access of education with specific focus on the achievement of schools in the Port of Spain and Environs district with respect to performance in the terminal examination. And firstly, I would like to direct a question to the Ministry of Education in the various submissions that would have been provided by the Ministry of Education. In the Ministry of Education, in its submission, highlighted that, and I quote, the factors contributing to academic achievement, school climate, socio-economic status, student engagement and absenteeism, intervention services, insufficient co-curricular activities, and this is in your submission on page 8 to 11, Numbers 2, Roman numeral 1. And the first question I would like to direct to the Ministry of Education. How has the school environment in the Port of Spain and Environs district affected the performance of the students in secondary schools? Direct question. Could you proceed, Ministry of Education?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as we would also have submitted, the circumstances in each individual school would vary. And as such, we would have, each individual school would have issues that they would treat with based on their school development plans and how they will treat with these issues to try and make the best of it and ensure that they create the best environment for the students that attend school there. So we will have some schools that where, for example, absenteeism of students and teachers would not be a problem at all, whereas in some schools it may be more so. You will have some schools where the socioeconomic issues would affect students' ability to attend, their ability to be engaged while they are in school. And in this regard, the ministry, for example, would provide support services such as school meals and transport and so on to help to facilitate those students when they come onto the compound. And there will be other schools where the socioeconomic factors may not be such of an issue. And we have schools as well where the schools make provisions for their individual students and their circumstances to help to ensure that they can engage in teaching and learning when they come onto the compound. And as a matter of fact, in this virtual environment, there are also schools which are going above and beyond and trying to ensure that their students can be engaged online.
So, okay, thank you. Pardon? Someone have a feedback?
Yes. Yes. Are you hearing me?
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead, Senator.
One of the first things you highlighted as a contributing factor was the high levels of crime and violence. Now, one of the schools, or perhaps the school that is most threatened, is the Port of Spain, the Southeast Secondary Schools. Of course, you have Russell Latapy and so on, but let me focus on Southeast because their problems are longer standing. Was not that school moved into John D at some point? And if so, why did it return to that volatile environment where over the years, students have in fact witnessed murders taking place? And I specifically speak about the first one where the body was lying there, because I received a call from a family member who was thoroughly traumatized by seeing that particular occurrence. So I just cannot understand. Perhaps you could explain to me why Southeast Secondary remains where it is today when an alternative was identified not too long ago.
Through the chair.
Mrs. Henry, go ahead. Go ahead, Mrs. Henry.
Through the chair, the movement to John D was a temporary measure while the ministry sought to treat with physical issues on the compound. The movement of a secondary school would, of course, require that the venue that a school is moved to, and Southeast caters to about 700 plus students or thereabouts. You would have to ensure that you have all of the facilities, all of the labs and so on. And it was a temporary measure. And when the school was established at that point, and the school is established to serve a community, we did not have the unfortunate occurrences, environmental, socioeconomic, that we have at the current time. So what is needed, rather than removing an entire school out of the community which is served. It is a concerted effort by all of the ministries and the government and social NGOs and so on to come together to try to address the issues in that geographic area. As I will repeat, it was a temporary move to facilitate physical or infrastructural issues and the compound to address those issues. And this is why the school remains where it was as originally established.
Yes, okay, thanks for that comment. But acting CEO, the process that you just identified, now in going back to the particular area where it's actually from, how would you rate the performance as a result of going back to its original destination?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, performance in terms of, just for clarification.
Well, okay, remember I said it was a temporary move where you all moved to the John D compound. Now you all are back in the, Sealots, Laventille area, right? How would you rate the movement in going back? Have you seen improvement in the climate of the school? Have you seen improvement in the academic abilities of the students? How would you rate the moving back to the particular area?
All right, so in terms of the academic performance, the school had an average academic performance and continues. It was just, I think, around 30%, and the in terms of the trend. The performance of the school remains generally at the same level in terms of academics. Of course, with the COVID-19, all of our schools may have had some issues if we're looking at terminal examinations at this point. We still have teachers who are dedicated to ensuring that the students perform at the best level. And we still continue to engage with stakeholders to try to do the best for our students at that school. The infrastructural issues that would have been addressed before the children were relocated back to their original school. And we continue to work with all of our stakeholders to ensure that our children benefit from the education that they're exposed to.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, do you think, Madam, that any child in Trinidad and Tobago deserves to be placed in that hotspot crime-ridden area where bullets could be flying at any time, where the environment is dirty, for use of a better word? Just think about environments in Upper Port of Spain, in the area of the convents and so on. Do you think that that is what the children from that area deserve, and that they should be sent back there with all of the attendant risk because you say it's to serve a particular area? Do you really think that they deserve that, madam?
Get your comment?
Through the chair. It is not a question of whether what the children deserve or what they don't do. It is a question of what the entire society of Trinidad and Tobago has to do to ensure that all of our children are equitably served and that all of our children are in environments where they can thrive.
Mr. Chair, through you. Mr. Chair?
Proceed, TTUTA.
Yes, TTUTA would like to comment on the question asked by the TTUTA would like to comment in terms of the question asked by Senator on Southeast and then respond to the substantive question, please.
Yes, you can proceed, TTUTA.
Okay, yes, thank you. So I am glad that Acting CEO made the point that the community of Southeast Port of Spain, when the school was established, that community was not the way it is now. It was of a totally different standard and nature. And CEO is quite correct, and TTUTA has made the point that the changing dynamics of persons in the neighborhood has impacted on that particular school. We must also remember that Southeast Port of Spain is lodged in what is a heritage location, a heritage building. So notwithstanding the infrastructure that CEO identified as necessary to relocate the school, it still does not change the fact that we will need to allocate specific resources to the construction of a new school, not only for Southeast, but in many areas of Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. Chair, Southeast was a high-performing school and still is, because we've had scholarship winners from that school in years past. But to the broader question, sir, of how the school environment has impacted students' performance, we have, as to use the Senator's terminology, schools in Upper Port of Spain, where the schools have very good support networks and mechanisms, and resources are provided by the alumni and additional stakeholders. And then we have schools such as Diego Martin North. We have schools such as Mucurapo, East Mucurapo and West Mucurapo. We have schools where the resource allocation is not as equal as it is in some areas. So whilst the teachers, as CEO said, are very committed and dedicated, and they are trying their best, the fact of the matter is the lack of adequate resources because of the limited funding that the schools and the ministry receives for schools, that would also impact on the school environment. Diego Martin North, we will all recall, colleagues, had a situation of violence and indiscipline in the school where external parties entered the compound and literally took charge of the school, ran over the school, right? And the students and the educators were held at bay for quite some time. It took a lot of doing. It took police intervention at one point. And therefore the point is, as Madam CEO said, it must be a cross-ministerial, a cross-agency approach if we are to enhance the environments of all our schools. Mr. Chair, TTUTA makes the point again, low achievement or underachievement of students is not the same as underachievement of schools. There are many factors, and you identified some out of the ministry's submission. So we need, Mr. Chair, TTUTA is humbly suggesting that we need to consider not simply a matter of relocating a school, but of using resources in a strategic way, such as has been done in the Laventel Schools project, to enhance the entire community where our schools are located. So we will pause there, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, thank you very much, TTUTA. At this time, I'd like to bring in the other officials in this inquiry, the Association of Principals of Assisted Secondary Schools, and then we'll hear also after from the Holy Ghost Fathers, and then we'll also ask Ms. Mahes Prasad to make a comment on the discussion, please. Kindly proceed.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I just want to concur with TTUTA in terms of contextualizing the whole school within the community when we look at performance. And I just want to add as well, we need to differentiate between underachievement as a term that is used in education and low achievement. Underachievement speaks to whether students are not achieving a potential that was mapped out and that they're not achieving that benchmark based on their context. And low achievement, talks about there's other factors, home, school, family, community, so many mitigating factors that will impact on their academic achievement. And I also want to put in a plug for a holistic look at how we measure success in our schools and as far as our students are concerned, and look at the value added to that student upon entry and at graduation 5 or 7 years later. I agree with TTUTA that a whole community focus is important in addressing both underachievement and low achievement of our students, that we must incorporate members of the community to have a sense of identification. We must understand the background of our students. There must be a personalized type of intervention so that the schools can be resourced with the infrastructure, the funding, the training of teachers to deal with the particular cohort of students in that context. And that way, our interventions could be much more meaningful and much more effective. I'll pause there so my other colleagues could respond.
I want to, through the chair, take the opportunity as well to suggest that the Association of Principals of Trinidad and Tobago, we also have a similar view. We recognize that any discussion looking at the achievement or the underachievement of our students and our schools, there must be a holistic approach to education. A systemic view must be examined, and then we must also take a microscopic type of approach to examine the individual institutions. I want to agree with my colleague and with TTUTA in terms of how we approach the issues that we have identified, because it's very easy for us to stay and to compare downtown with uptown if we want to look at it that way. But there are issues in individual schools that need to be examined. And I think first we must take a look at our systemic issues, understanding the curriculum that we have. Is there adaptation in our curriculum for some of the schools? You have students going in with 30% and less in some of our schools, and yet still we use the same markers to determine success in terms of examination performance and on graduation day. What was just said about the throughput is very important. What is the value added? As far as we know, there is absolutely no index really take into consideration achievements in the tech-fork areas, achievements in sport and cultural activities. Institutions such as the ones we have been highlighting this morning have been known to add value to Trinidad and Tobago in every aspect of its life and livelihood. And these things are not necessarily taken into consideration. So we need to take a very holistic and systemic look, in addition to adding our microscopic examinations of individual institutions, so that we will be able to better understand what those issues. And therefore, when we introduce our methods of solving, it would be prescriptive and dealing with specific institutions rather than broad-based plasters that we tend to affix to keeping wounds in our education system. Absolute pause here.
Yeah, Father Mendez, you care to give some feedback?
I would, Mr. Chair, I would just like to agree publicly with the two principals associations, particularly the last points that Mr. Simon made, and also with what TTUTA has had to say on it, because in fact, that is where we need to put our resources. Thank you.
Any member of the committee would like to raise any question at this particular time? You have the opportunity now.
I have a question. I find it rather intriguing to read and hear TTUTA's statement in their submission, which it seems everybody has agreed with, the other entities, TTUTA says, TTUTA prefers the underachievement of students may not be equated with underachievement of schools. And I would like to find out how or in what circumstances can a school be deemed to be achieving when the students are underachieving? What do we look for? What do we see when we see a school or we determine that the school has achieved when the students have all failed or there's no doubt that they are underachieving? What does that present? What does it look like? An achieving school with unachieving students.
Ministry of Education, Mrs. Henry David, you care to come in, please?
Through the chair, I will ask my Director of Curriculum to answer, Mrs. Singh.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, members of the committee.
Yes. Okay. Good morning. Kindly proceed. Thanks.
In terms of evaluating school achievement and using student academic achievement as a comparative, what we want to point out is that, and this underscores what Mr. Simon has said, that you are looking at the output and assessing outputs from one institution against other institutions in one factor, the academic aspect. We have to consider in many of these school situations, students who come into the school have scores of 30% and under, in some cases, significant numbers of students. And whereas in terms of the output, they may not have the same quantum of performance in terms of the academics, what we would see is the value added as the students move through the system in terms of they may not have all 5 subjects as the indicator would have provided, but they would have improved in terms of their academic performance. And the school would have leverage on other areas of co-curricular, the arts, as we've said in the TVET areas, in terms of their values, personal development, in order to provide an opportunity for the students who may not at the 5th form or at the next level of exit, may not yet be of comparable academic performance, but may be better prepared for having gone through the system at the school. So two points I'd like to make. The idea that the school have added value in the sense that the output in terms of the student that they have worked with has actually improved when comparison with their input scores. 1, 2, that there are other factors that would have seen those students excel, develop, and can be leveraged on in terms of their next stage of academic pursuits or career pursuits.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, TTUTA.
Yes, TTUTA would like to proffer a further response. In addition to what, thank you. In addition to what Ms. Singh said, I would want to go back to the example of East Mucurapo Secondary, because that's one where we have some sound evidence. It suggests in the first instance, Mr. Chair and colleagues, that as was said by previous speakers, how we benchmark student success as a society needs to change. It appears we are only looking at performance in terminal examinations in terms of the academics, and we are not really contemplating the arts, as Ms. Singh said, and TVET. East Mucurapo Secondary. The CXC publishes on an annual basis for all to see a merit list of students' scores in each subject area for academic and non-academic areas. So academic, tech, voc, VAPA, and so forth. When we look at the academic subjects, a number of particular schools will have students on that merit list. Good, science, mathematics, biology, chemistry, business, and so forth. And they are scoring 1s and 2s in those particular areas. In 2017, on that merit list, CXC published the names of 3 students, or 4, forgive me, from East Mikorapo Secondary, who scored and attained grades 3, 4, and 5 in different sectors of agricultural science. Their names appeared on that regional merit list. Why? Because as far as the board, the examining body was concerned, those students overperformed, they excelled. We might not see a grade 3 or grade 4 as something significant, but giving the particular components of those agricultural science examinations, Mr. Chair, those students excelled, and CXC felt it necessary to reward them. We have similar recognition for students who have excelled in VAPA, as you yourself said, Mr. Chair, in terms of sport and so. So it means that if we are to look at student achievement, Mr. Chair, colleagues, our lens has to be adjusted. Achievement of individuals, especially based on 21st century learning principles, is relevant to the learner. That was alluded to by the principals. And therefore, we need to stop using the broad brush of a school achieving because the school has received X scholarships or Y number of passes, and start looking at the individual perspective and how we are developing our nation's students. Mr. Chair, if we are talking about national development and development of our human resource capital, focusing on all aspects of student development and success, academic and otherwise, is critical at this point in time. And there we suggest as TTUTA, the vicissitudes of COVID has given us the opportunity, Mr. Chair and colleagues, to make some much needed changes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair, may I add to what TTUTA just said?
Yeah, proceed.
I just want to agree with Mr. Simon and with the president of TTUTA regarding the shift that is needed in how we look and assess students' outcome in terms of terminal examination. I think it is highly unfair that we look at 5 passes at CSEC, including math and English, as just the only yardstick to measure the end product and whether students could transition to the next stage in their academic life. If we look at what the National Training Agency said regarding CVQs, they describe it as representing achievement of a set of competencies which define core work practice of an occupational area consistent with the levels articulated within the regional qualifications framework. I am quoting this just to show the relevance of CVQ as an alternative path for many students who, and it is not recognized at the end after 5 years. We just measure the CSEC, 5 passes, including math and English, when we look at that yardstick to measure academic performance across the board. So that broad brush approach really is short-sighted. And the CVQ qualifications involve a lot of in-depth work by the students. And at the end of the day, they are better prepared to transition to the real world and to make a meaningful contribution. So this should be recognized, it should be reinforced, and it should be resourced as well on the part of the ministry.
If I may, having heard the comments, I maintain that the statement, the underachievement of students in Are you hearing me? Are you hearing
Yes,
me?
we are. Yes, we are.
Right.
Go ahead, Senator.
Underachievement of students may not be equated with the underachievement of schools, because all the examples that have been brought forward in support of that statement, they prove that the statement is incorrect. Because to show the achievement of schools, you have shown the achievement of students. So you cannot say that the underachievement of students may not be equated with underachievement of schools, because to prove your argument, you show how students have been achieving in other areas. And that is in fact what you should say, is that not only one criterion should be used, but various criteria, but you must equate it, the schools, with the performance of the students. So I hope you understand now why I took issue with that statement. You must always go back to the students and what they have achieved to show how well the school has done. But what you want to say is that across the board, it is not only academics, but you judge them according to various criteria. I hope we're clear now on why I made that statement.
Mrs. Henry David, Ministry of Education. In terms of the discourse that we have heard from the various other officials, I would like to get a feedback from you based on the Ministry of Education in going forward, right? We would have heard that, how do we benchmark students? We understand that it has been mentioned that it has to change, right? We need to include the arts, tech voc, right? We presently, it has been said that we presently based it on how much scholarship a school received, how much subjects a student would have received, and it's also based on terminal examinations. In going forward, the Ministry of Education, are there any developmental programs, any discussion, any feedback that is taking place at present in order to make any changes along those lines, take into effect what the other officials would have mentioned this morning?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The ministry is, as we speak, engaged in internal discussions with different divisions of the ministry, looking at how we should assess quality and what changes we should make to the curriculum, and how the concept and how curriculum is conceptualized in order to ensure that we do just that, that we look certainly way and beyond the issue of academics, that we look at how the schools are progressing in a number of factors. So, for example, some of the issues that have come up in our discussions, we need to look at the climate of our schools. We need to look at how our schools engage with parents and engage with other stakeholders. We need to look at what are the extra and co-curricular activities that we have in our schools and how those contribute to the growth of the overall holistic growth of our students. We are coming up, we are in the process of developing a metric to see how we should measure what our graduate, our successful graduate should look like. In our last education policy paper, we looked at eight factors, and we are now moving beyond those factors to look not just to look beyond the academics and look at the knowledge, skills, and attitudes that we want our children to develop, and to see how the curriculum that we have how we can manipulate that curriculum to ensure that at the end of the day, quite beyond the academic factors, our students leave our schools with the 21st century skills that are needed, with the attitudes, for example, towards nationalism, that to encourage our students to be caring individuals who care about themselves, their peers, and their country at large. We are looking, those are the things that we are discussing currently within the ministry. And as other stakeholders have said this morning, when we come up with these metrics at the general Ministry of Education level, we now need to look at how at the individual school level, those things are translated on the ground to ensure that we have the success that we are looking for. So it is well and good to have plans at the central ministry level, but where the rubber hits the road at the level of the individual schools, where these things are translated, there is where we need to direct our focus to ensure that the changes that we at the ministry see as necessary and that have been communicated to us through the consultative process that we had in the month of November last year, because all of these discussions are coming out of our meetings with our many stakeholders and the concerns that they have indicated to us. And we are moving towards coming up with the plans and coming up with the systems that will ensure that these plans are disaggregated at the individual school level. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And again, Mrs. Henry David, all this, what you would have mentioned, we are taking into consideration the COVID-19 protocols as set out by the Ministry of Health in going forward with regards to schools.
Of course, sir.
Mr. Chair, Tutor,
Yes.
indulgence to make
yes,
one
Mrs.
final point. Yes, so one final point. Since we are talking about terminal examinations, Mr. Chair, I am glad the CEO has pointed out the plans. We must not forget that we are looking at terminal examinations, the outcomes, and therefore we are concerned that as we look at our students who are doing the CXA exams for 2021, both at CSEC and CAPE, the way CXC has determined these exams to be run, we are very concerned as educators about the performance of these students. The fact that we now have the 3 papers, the fact that students have had limited interaction, Mr. Chair and colleagues, the fact that there are resources that still need to be provided, the emotional and psychological impact of the COVID situation. So whilst we are talking in a general sense, Mr. Chair, TTUTA would want us to consider that we had a cohort in 2020 which was negatively affected. We are yet to hear how those students have fared and what is happening with them in terms of their Youth Development Index position. We are deeply concerned about the outcome of the 2021 examinations and how these students will fare given the current circumstances. Thank you very much, sir.
Is there somebody else? Because I have another question.
Good day, everyone. This is Ms. Chair. Through the chair.
Yeah, you are
yes.
Association of Principals of Public Secondary Schools.
Thank you, sir.
Proceed.
Yes, thank you. I would just like to speak to what Ms. Sonia Mahes-Prasad was addressing in terms of the CVQ, because I think that is some opportunity that Trinidad and Tobago has missed in terms of looking at achievement in a broader sense. The CVQ is recognized by CXC. It is literally moderated by CXC using our National Training Agency as part of that system. And yet at the end of the day, after a child has gone through 2 years of doing and creating and a portfolio, if you have ever seen a CVQ portfolio, it's a massive undertaking. It is not something that a child can do in a day. They literally have to build their skill level up to the point where they can produce a quality product at the end of the day. And yet it is not recognized. It is not no school that is doing CVQ. At the end of the day, they say, yes, that child was able to get 2 passes at CSEC level and they were able to achieve 3 CVQs. And so that child has come out of school with their 5 subjects. It does not happen. So the child is left thinking and the society is left thinking that therefore that child has failed. And that's not the case. So just as all the other presenters have been saying, we need to broaden it. Achievement is more than just academic performance. Achievement takes so many different forms and we have to be able to acknowledge and appreciate when our children are able to do, because that's what school is all about. You're finding out what you can do, not the things that you cannot do. The things that you cannot do, of course, we would want you to learn it, but that's not the objective of school. It should not be the objective of school. And therefore, I would like to endorse what has been said before and all the pointers that have been made concerning the benchmarking that has to take place. I am pleased that Ms. Henry has indicated that the ministry is broadening its idea of what achievement is all about. But I'm also still concerned because very often the ministry comes up with some beautiful plans, wonderful plans. And yet when it comes down to the where it has to take place, the granular level, as you would say, this school, this particular school in this particular district, you don't see it coming into fruition because literally sometimes our administrators' hands are tied. There are so many things that we need in order to get just the support. They have beautiful training programs in the Ministry of Education. They give you the training, they give you that kind of support, and then after that, they sometimes tie your hands. And so you can come up with a wonderful plan for your school, excellent plan for your school. You know where you want it to go because you are there on the ground. You know what is happening with your stakeholders. You know what's happening with your children, and you're ready to move forward. And yet, resources don't come to you. The kind of technical support that you may need doesn't come to you. And so you just end up still having this situation where the child is unable to really reach that full potential that they are supposed to reach. So this morning, I'm very happy that we are part of this discussion. But just as my VP said, we are hoping that out of this comes a number of recommendations that would take us forward and take us forward in a way that's going to help our children to continue to achieve all of them, and not just some, all of them. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I'd like to add one thing. First of all, I fully endorse what the President of the Association of Public Secondary Schools has just said, but I would like to also point out one other thing. The majority of the children who, quote, underachieve, those are children coming out of primary schools with 30% percentile or less. And if we are going to be honest with ourselves and with everyone, we have to recognize that those who score at that level are literally functionally illiterate. And the fact that they go into secondary schools and eventually come out with 2 or 3 passes at the CXC level, along with whatever CVQs they may obtain, that is a minor miracle that has taken place in those secondary schools. And the teachers who have brought them there from functional illiteracy to 2 or 3 CXC passes, that is a fantastic achievement. And those are just looked at as, oh, they didn't make 5 passes, they are no good. That's quite the opposite. And I think what needs to happen is that the ministry needs to take a look at the SCA grade and compare it to the CXC grades when they come and see where that child has moved and reward the teachers that have brought them there. We have some fantastic teachers. We have others, yes, we know, but we have some fantastic teachers in our system. And looking just at a level of pass, CXC, or CSEC really, as the benchmark for a school, that's not good enough. I think that it is really showing disrespect to a lot of very hard work that is done in the classroom over the time. There are other problems, which I'd like to raise a little later, but there are other problems with teachers, but certainly there is a fantastic amount of achievement taking place throughout the system. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment, Father Mendez. And as you are with us at this time, in your submission, Father Mendez, you identified, according to data provided by the Ministry of Education for schools within the Port of Spain and Environs districts for 2015 to 2020, of the 3 secondary schools managed by your organization, one of the schools, St. Anthony's College, has been performing under the national average for CSEC. That is, more than 54% of the students attempting 5 subjects for CSEC attain these subjects, while the other 2 schools have been performing above the national average, right? I want to get your opinion here. What are the causes of the disparity in the levels of achievement amongst the schools managed by the organization in the Port of Spain and Environs district? Care to comment, Father?
Yes, certainly. Thank you. If the ministry would go and take a look at the list of children who come in on the SEA and compare them with the list of children who eventually write the CSEC exam in that school, you will see that at least 50% of the children writing the exam did not go into the school in Form 1. The reason being that many parents, for whatever reason, deem that they don't see this school as worthy of their children, and they do all that they can to get them transferred, so that you find a lot of them over the years have transferred mainly to QRC, but also to Fatima, and a few to St. Mary's, a few to Trinity. And by the time they hit Form 4 and 5, 50% of the incoming cohort is made up of children who have been transferred in. And when one takes a look at the CSEC grades of those children, those CSEC grades are between 30 and 40% or percentile. There are a few who come in with a higher percentile in the 50s, but mainly it is the lower ones. And the fact that those children, again, are able to get 3 and quite a few of them 4, you are quoting having 5, but many of them get 3 and 4 passes, which I dare say they may not have been able to get that number of passes in another school, that a lot of care has been taken in bringing them there. But we have noticed that it is the same 3 or 4 subjects that the children will achieve in. And when we take a look at who teaches them, we see that it's consistent. The same teachers are the ones who are able to bring these children through to a level of getting even 1s and 2s in the subjects. A lot of them 3, but 1s and 2s in the subjects that they pass. And when you look at the teachers, tutor won't like this, but when you look at the teachers in the subjects that they don't pass, those teachers, when you look at their late coming, when you look at their attendance, they take the full 14 and 14. That's 28 days, a full month if you count weekends, 28 days, which they are legally allowed. The principal can do, and the board can do nothing about that. You try to put a little bit of moral suasion, and they strips and move on. You hear comments in late October, well, I have so many days inside, when am I going to take them? And that's sick days. You're going to decide beforehand how many sick days you're going to take. I think tutor needs to do something about that. Talk about the morality of what their teachers are doing when they take these days, when they don't really need them, other than to take them to do whatever their own business is. At any rate, there are 28 days that they take. And you look at the students from those courses, you find that those students don't achieve a pass rate, which maybe they could have had the teacher been there all along. So that's one thing. 2, the lack of teachers. I'll give 2 examples. One is a teacher who for the past 5 years comes to the school once a month so that they meet the regulation. This has gone all the way to teaching service. teaching service has sent the person back to the school. They continued to not come to school, but for one day so that their job remains in place. The ministry is fully aware of this. There is maybe a 6-inch high file that the ministry has about this teacher. The ministry won't replace a teacher. The school does not have the resources to pay another teacher. So that's one thing. So a lot of children either are left untaught in the subjects, or we have to kind of double up, which is unfair to the teacher that this is happening in, double up in another, and there are labs attached. Another teacher has 2 Regulation 90 things on them. They have been coming late, significantly late, since 2014, and not much is being done. The ministry doesn't really seem to take on those things. They pay lip service it. They will take the paperwork we send in. They will stamp the ministry stamp on it, and then nothing. The ministry has to get together. And another thing is, when we go to the ministry over the years, you go to the ministry, you talk to various officers. There is a serious problem there, which I hope the minister will take on. The amount or the number of clerks in the ministry and other officers going up higher, all the way even to directors, that change so often. As soon as someone learns a job, they get transferred elsewhere. Many people without any education experience in the civil service are put into the are put into the Ministry of Education. So there is a big problem there. There's always people in the ministry learning the job that they know nothing about it. There's no institutional memory. That impacts the schools and impacts the students tremendously. Thank you.
Right. Father Mendez, I know you have said a lot, but from your standpoint, how can this situation be reconciled based on what you are saying there? Have you sent in recommendations? Have you sent in a document to the ministry in order to say, this is how the problems can be solved? A quick comment, please.
Mr. Chair, I would like to come in, please.
Okay, after Father Mendez, Senator Cox.
Okay, we have had many meetings over the years. I used to be a principal. I was principal actually at St. Anthony's in the 90s. I was principal at St. Mary's for 14 years after that. And I've been on the board. And the number of meetings that we've had over the years with the ministry, unfortunately, the ministry people change, and then the knowledge or experience of the problems goes away, and you have to start all over again. That's a serious problem within the Ministry of Education. Institutional memory is absent, absolutely absent. They don't even know the regulations, and they start to do things that are, might I say, even illegal at times, because they're breaking the regulations, and the regulations under the Act means that those actions are either legal or illegal because they're regulations under the Act. And when they do things like that, then, and nobody is calling it and no amount of complaining. So send in a what to the ministry. When is the ministry going to get serious? My question. When is the ministry going to get serious about implementing an institutional memory and keeping it abreast?
Thank you, Father Mendez.
Mr. Chair, TTUTA would like to comment after the minister.
One second. I will give you the opportunity, but I'll also give the opportunity to the Ministry of Education to come in. But I'd like to bring in Senator Donna Cox at this time. Senator Cox.
Yes, I just want to applaud the contribution by Father Mendez. It's not often that you would hear persons being as honest and upfront about ills in their environment. And this is not just the teaching service I'm talking about, but sometimes people would cover up, or they would not be honest to say, well, we have some problems also as teachers. So I wanted to say, I applaud you for your honesty and openness. I want to say too that even with the teachers that you spoke about, we have, of course, fantastic teachers. I always say a lot of my friends are schoolmates and so on are teachers. And therefore, some are principals at this point in time. And I know that many of them are very committed and so on. But my concern has always been, what is in place for those who are not as committed? What's in place for them? Because what happens when teachers don't teach when they're supposed to teach and they don't, and whether they are distracted doing something else, being at home, taking their sick leave or studying, who suffers in all of this? The students. And clearly this takes place in particular schools. If you check, you will see that. You also have to look at the principals of those schools. Because I went to a government-assisted school, and there's a lot, I see the difference in how the principals and teachers are made to account compared to in the government schools. All right? I see that the assisted schools take more time they look at statistics, and they watch to see, they must know from the statistics, that a teacher is not performing to the optimum capacity. And this is something, I think part of the problem is also lack of accountability. Lack of accountability. I've been on campus and know teachers who were there full time. So who are teaching these students? Full time. And yet, I'm sure they're getting good at performance appraisals. So then, who suffers in all of this? And this is my concern. You understand? Who suffers in all of this? Yes, I'm originally from Port of Spain, right? And of course, I have always felt that your way out of or moving up is through education. So I understand the importance of education. But then again, our children may be going to particular schools, yet there are teachers teaching in government schools, even in Port of Spain, and there is no kind of caring as to, we have to ensure that these students learn this. This has to happen. It is not happening, yet when you speak, people blame, the blame is put all around everybody else instead of looking at ourselves and recognizing there are persons who are really not performing to the level that they are supposed to. And as we affect them, we affect society on the whole. You made some points about education, and I want to say that same thing again, lack of accountability in some of the government offices. It's not so easy, because of the fact that even you may have to change legislation to be able to get persons to account in some government ministries. Because again, the staff may be slipshod in what they are doing and may not be as they may not work as they're supposed to. But then they get good staff reports in the end, they get promoted, they move around, and what happens? So even when you're in the actual interaction of the school system with education and so on, your hands are pretty much tied. Some of the areas need changes in legislation so that persons would be more accountable. It's not so easy in a ministry. Sometimes I see things happening even in this ministry, but it's not easy to make a move because sometimes you see things happening that should not. But when you check, these people are being promoted and are getting good staff reports. What could a minister or a PS even do sometimes? You talk to the supervisors who are supposed to ensure that people work and do what they're supposed to do, but it doesn't always happen. So unless we put checks and balances and proper accountability in place, this is something that will continue. All right. I think I made some points. I think yes, I covered all the points. So thank you again for your honest, open, and upright comments.
Right. Thank you. I just want to ensure that the Chief Educational Officer are making her notes, right? Because you'll get an opportunity to respond, right? At this time, I'd like to hear from TTUTA, first of all, And then I'd also like to hear from Mr. David Simon and also Mrs. Sonia Mahes-Prasad on the same discussion, right? How do we reconcile, right, the whole scenario, and also with regards to going forward, what recommendations that we can put. So I'll start with TTUTA first. Proceed.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Colleagues, this may surprise you, but TTUTA will not, and Father Menz may be surprised to hear it, TTUTA will not condone such behaviors. And as a matter of fact, over the last few months, in case you are not aware, the new executive of TTUTA has been saying to educators at all levels, you are being paid to do a particular job, you need to do your job. Yes, we have constraints, and of course, COVID-19 has exacerbated certain circumstances within which we operate. But the situations or the examples that Father Menz gave at St. Anthony's, those are totally untenable. So TTUTA will fight, Mr. Chair and colleagues, tooth and nail to defend the rights of teachers and their terms and conditions. But we have also been saying to our members at all levels, do the job that you are being paid to do in the interest of our children and our education system. So we will not, I will put in the public domain, Mr. Chair, we will not support wrongdoing. We never have. We've called out persons who've been in breach of regulations, in breach of simple good ethics. As to the issue of accountability that Minister Cox raised, that is a major part of the problem. Because as was said, at the level of the school, there are certain recommendations, certain records and certain recommendations that must be taken. And of course, that has to go forward within the ministry. So Minister Cox is quite correct that the systemic issues within the different ministries, including education, and Father Menz spoke about one of those issues in terms of the movement of persons. That is a factor. Now, I will disagree with Father Menz in the terms of having institutional memory to deal with matter X at a school. Mr. Chair, honorable committee members, we don't need institutional memory. We need proper record keeping and transparency in our recording. And therefore, whether we do it on paper or we do it digitally, the evidence and the records will be there, properly documented and collated, so that whoever comes after, if we shift clerks, will be able to follow. I want to make the point from TTUTA's perspective, Mr. Chair. As I said, in addition to speaking to our members, we are interacting with the ministry on a consistent basis. We have interacted with the Teaching Service Commission on some of these same matters in the recent past. So within the next few months, we are going to be charting a way forward to deal with these issues at both the level of the TSC and the ministry, and to deal with our members accordingly and their output. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'd like to, Mrs. Sonia Mahes-Prasad, could I get your feedback and comments?
Thank you, Chair. So I just want to add in terms of how we treat with our students coming in at that Form 1 level, and if we are to look at school-based management and developmental planning that is targeted and realistic and grounded, it must be based on a very clinical analysis of data that when they enter, not just the percentage they would have attained at the English language arts, mathematics, creative writing component, but also in terms of the student's psychosocial background, their home background, their needs. These needs assessments are very important. So I'm a strong advocate for research, to be research-driven in decision-making, to have a plan that embraces the holistic aspect of the child. And also there is something to be said, as Father Ron pointed out, school effect, the expectations and the culture that is found in a school. Things that are communicated through from the principal to the staff, to the parents, to the students. What are the expectations that we have for our students' success? And I keep saying not just academically, but that holistic development. mapping our school development plan in a very realistic way. Our school development plans must be dynamic. They must cater for the external environment, the specialized needs of our children, and we must be able to go back every year and look at those plans, see what we need to tinker, what we need to change, and be consistent in our use of information that we have gathered through this variety of means in mapping the way forward. I do agree that there must be a tone in the school, a culture, which recognizes the needs of our students and that is communicated very clearly to all. It is very important at the recruitment stage. Principals need to be trained. We used to have an induction and orientation for new principals years ago, and it was very successful. And it is something that over the years, sort of fell a bit by the wayside. I think it's very important because the role of the principal is essential if we are to maintain a certain expectation and school culture and visioning as we go forward. I just want to say that schools are very dynamic and it is not something that could be on autopilot. And we always have to look at the teachers, the staff, the needs of the students, the needs of the community, and be adaptable throughout.
Mr. Simon?
Thank you very much, Chairman. I would like to, of course, the Association of Principals would like to make a couple of submissions here. One, I really do appreciate what Mr. Cox had to say, because it is obvious that we do need to have a paradigm shift. And that paradigm shift mustn't only take place in education, it has to take place in our overall society. In education, we are forced to operate with archaic regulations and laws. These regulations must be changed. Otherwise, we are going to spend the next 150 years doing exactly what we are doing, and there will not be fundamental change within the education system that is going to affect the lives of our children. So that many of the issues that Father Mendes would have raised in terms of particular teachers not doing what they are supposed to. Sad to say, but in many instances, our hands are tied as principals in Trinidad and Tobago because of the regulations that we are forced to operate with and under. And that is not something, as Minister Cox pointed out, that is exclusive to education alone. It applies to all aspects of our lives in Trinidad and Tobago. And that has to change. There must be a paradigm shift, and education must be included where that is concerned. One of the things that we also would like to see would be changes in management models. We are talking about underachievement in the Port of Spain area, and a microscopic view of what is taking place points us in the direction that there are different models, there are different management models applied to our schools. And there is a particular model that is far more successful than the other. We need to look at our models in education because it is not something that we have to recreate throughout the world. There are different management models as they apply to education. I must say that insofar as the ministry is concerned, the ministry has made effort. One, to train our principals. Principals nationally were engaged in just over a year and a half, maybe ago, we were trained. And that training came in very, very handy in terms of allowing us to manage our schools. The school-based management model that has been introduced, allowing some degree of decentralization, is an excellent idea. However, the ministry does need, as my colleague, Ms. Patricia Pitt would have to say, to allow principals the freedom and not necessarily use models like these and still have our hands tied in terms of some of the things that we are able to do. And one last point that I would like to offer on behalf of all principals is something that we need to take a very serious look at in terms of having people who are full-time in their responsibilities. We speak about having deans and HODs. Those deans and HODs are expected to teach, yet we identify numerous issues that are linked to behavioral aspects of our children. How are deans able to effectively deal with issues such as these when they are not full-time? They are not able to give all of their efforts, neither do they receive the resources to be able to make meaningful contributions, especially with the shortfall that we experience since student support is always overburdened. We need to look at these things and ensure that these individuals will be able to really function once they are given the opportunity that is laid out magnificently by the school-based management plan. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, colleagues. Mrs. Henry David, I think the ball is now in your court in order to give us some feedback on the various comments that were made. Like, for example, we heard of the CVQ, right? What's the direction of the Ministry of Education as we go forward? We would have heard of Father Mendez talking about the legality of the 28 days entitlement of sick leave in advance, right? The morality of tutor with regards to the situation, the lack of teachers not being replaced, teachers having to double up, and as a result of that, children are being at a disadvantage. Regulation 90, right? Significant late coming by teachers, clerks in the ministry being changed on a regular basis. The institutional knowledge that we would have heard of. Also, quote unquote, illegal activities. Just a little feedback on each one of those aspects. And we also heard from Senator Donna Cox, teachers who do not teach, lack of accountability, full-time teachers at UE. We can go on and on. I think we would have heard it. So let's give us some feedback from the ministry's perspective.
Mr. Chairman, before the ministry responds, if I may, I would like to...
Senator, is it along the same particular line? Because I know we heard a lot, and I think, the Ministry of Education is probably waiting to feedback. Is it on the same aspect, or it's a new point?
No, I would like her to respond as to whether there are sufficient teachers from remedial education, and if in fact that if there's anything being done to increase the number of staff in the student support services, and if there are any plans to reward teachers or to encourage teachers to go into co-curricular and extracurricular activities, because you do it from the goodness of your heart, but because it's so important, if something can be done along those lines.
Right, thank you, Senator. Proceed, Madam Acting CEO.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, so there's quite a number of issues, starting with what I would call human resource management issues. So, Senator Cox would have indicated it is the DNA of a ministry to have staff movement, and as TTUTA would have indicated, what we really need is to ensure that our records are properly kept, and that in the hand over to the different, to the new clerical officers, we have all of the data in front of us so that we can go through all the processes. So I will start by saying that if in terms of disciplining of teachers and other officers, there is an identified process to be followed, which starts with the getting of records at the level of the school. The school will send forward a complaint or so. If it is deemed that it's something, it's an infraction that has broken the regulation, we will start the process for Regulation 90, which involves an investigation into the incident or incidents, as it were. And at the end of that process, at the Ministry of Education, recommendations are made to the Teaching Service Commission. The Ministry of Education is not the entity that disciplines teachers. Father Mendes would have spoken about Regulation 90s. What that means is the ministry has done its investigation, and at the end of that process, I'm not saying that the process is the best in the world and that it works. I am saying, however, and TTUTA will bear me out, that persons have the right to due process, and in so doing, in ensuring that we give our children the value that they deserve when they enter school and expect to be educated, that we all need to ensure that we do our parts. And the president of TTUTA would have indicated that we are in constant consultation with them, and one of the recommendations they have made to us, and which we are seeking to ensure that we go through it, is that we continuously train our administrators at the level of the school, so that when they enter that progressive discipline process, we can ensure that we have dotted all of our I's and crossed our T's, so that if we are sending something forward to the Teaching Service Commission, we can be reasonably sure that we have done and carried out the process as it should have been, and that we present them with enough evidence that they can take the requisite action. With respect to the movement of staff and keeping of records, I will admit that we have some issues along those lines, and we have at present we are moving towards the digitization of those records that can be digitized, because as the speakers before me would have indicated, in the public service, you operate under certain regulations with respect to what records should be kept and how they should be kept, and so on. And we are also looking at the systems and procedures to ensure that they are done in the best possible way. We have brought in persons on contract who are assisting us with these processes to ensure that we move to a better place in terms of how our records are kept and how persons are handed over to when they move. With respect to I see Mrs. Simon spoke about changing the regulations, which is not under our remit, but when we are asked by various entities for our comments on those things, we try to provide the answers that are required of us. And changes in management models, I was glad when Mr. Simon indicated that the ministry has been trying to provide the training for our administrators, so that at the level of the schools, they can do what is necessary to ensure that systems are put in place. I take Ms. Pitt's point in terms of the hands of administrators being somewhat tied, again, by the same regulations, and we will continue to work within the ministry and with our stakeholders to see how we can move to a better place where that is concerned. In terms of whether deans can be full-time, that is really an issue for the chief personnel officer. And with respect to the direction of CVQ and CVQ recognition, I will ask the director of curriculum to comment on that. And after that, through the chair, I will ask our social work specialist to indicate, to respond to Ms. Thompson-Ahi in terms of the numbers of persons in the student support services division. So,
Mrs. Henry David, before you move on to your colleague, the management models that Principal Simon spoke about. Yes, the management models that Mr. Simon spoke about, is it you all have a documentation that he would have supplied with you all, or is it, could you shed some light on it? When you say management models, or if it is that Mr. Simon is better to answer that question?
Chair, Mr. Simon would have to answer that question, but I take his point is that in the systems that existed 50 years ago are not necessarily what is best placed in the 21st century to deal with treatment issues that come forward. And COVID-19, for example, has shown us that we need to be flexible in order to treat with issues that come to us, on a daily basis.
And what I would like to say as the acting chair for this committee, if that document could be provided to the committee, please, the various management models that may have, or whether Mr. Simon could produce us the committee with those different models.
Chair, I would put that ball in Mr. Simon's court.
Okay, so you can now go to your other officials. Or Mr. Simon, you wanted to comment on it now?
Yeah, if I'm
okay, that's briefly,
Mr. Chair,
for the public.
I would use the examples right here. I mean, the management models that I'm speaking about are simply different models of managing schools. And I would use 3 different systems that we have here. For example, we have the government schools with one particular mode and system of management. They are the government-assisted schools. And then there is a very unique educational experience in Trinidad and Tobago, which we see with the Bishop's Trinity East, because that is a public-private management model that has been put in place, which is somewhat different from the traditional government-assisted school and very different from the government school. So within our own educational experience here, there are 3 different models that we speak about. And in theory, in education worldwide, there are different management models that are used in terms of how schools are run. And that is what I'm speaking to. But right here in Trinidad and Tobago, we do have 3 different models that are used. And there are many commonalities, but when you take a microscopic view, there are a number of significant differences which can determine exactly how these institutions are allowed to function and operate in their daily operation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And is it true to say, Mr. Simon, that again, among these 3 different models, the educational development of the students are varied from these 3 models?
I think once you examine the data, it is going to be clear that the statement you just made, Mr. Chair, is quite correct. The data is going to support that, because even the topic that we are looking at in terms of the performance of schools in Port of Spain, while we can look at the national averages, etc., and the general averages, when you take a microscopic view of the data in front of you, you are going to see huge differences between different models within the Port of Spain region. So yes, you're quite correct.
Thank you. Okay, so again, Mrs. Henry David, your colleagues can now come in.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Through the chair, I'm responding concerning the issue of CVQ. In a recent webinar held by the UWI, the principal pointed out that we have in our educational landscape what is called the formal, the informal, and the non-formal educational experiences. What we are able to capture at this point in time and what we are using to report on schools would be the formal and largely using an academic performance indicator. With respect to CVQ, CVQ is a skills-based program. And that is why Ms. Pitt will say to you that what students are assessed by is the development of a portfolio that shows the development of the skill and evidence towards that end. Within the CBQ system, you have what is called regional occupational standards, ROSs, and to get a CVQ, there are a number of ROSs that must be met. So a child may be doing a CVQ, may complete some and not all of the ROS, and may not at the end of the 2-year period be awarded a CVQ because there are only partial completion of the requirements. And until recently, I would say within the last month, CANTA has ratified with CXC in terms of the national qualification framework to establish equivalence with CSEC and CVQs, so that the potential of that would be that when you are saying a child has 5 subjects and you say 2 CSEC and 3 CVQs, you are talking about 5 passes and they are equivalent. The process is a little difficult to have arrived at this point. At the end of the day, when you assign a qualification, the system must ensure that this qualification is both valid and it is reliable. And when you are looking at assessing a program where you are looking at skills-based assessment, it is altogether quite different from an academic assessment where you have a written paper, multiple choice structured, and so on. So that it has taken some time to reach this point, but we believe that where we are now pivots us forward in terms of being able to broaden now the assessment of students and to actually be able to capture in a rigid and robust system what largely falls into informal and possibly non-formal education. The implication is that children would be able to now find a mechanism where their skills, whether they do it in the formal school context, whether they do it through civilian conservation or what other opportunity they have to be assessed and to have certification afforded to them. That has been instructive in terms of formalizing career pathways that take students in and out of the system in terms of the TVET careers. So we are now in a position to better track students in terms of even if they drop out and they come back through another way, to be able to move in from secondary into tertiary areas in the TVET areas, because we now have a system that is better prepared to establish parity in terms of TVET areas, CVQs, and CSEC. I hope that...
Thank you. From Ministry of Education, the Senator Thompson-Ayi comment and feedback on the remedial classes, remedial teaching.
No, not anymore.
Who from the Ministry of Education will be seeing to that? Acting CEO.
Mr. Chairman, at the present time, the ministry does not have remedial teachers in the secondary system. Right? It is not necessarily something that we have had in-depth discussion on, but it's coming out of this inquiry and the recommendations. It's something that we can look into to see how we can approach that, whether we need to have remedial teachers, whether we need to include in our training of our current teachers that remedial aspect, because if we are being frank, we have a number of schools where students, where significant, as my colleague would have said, a significant number of the students entering in Form 1 do have some remedial issues. What we do have in place is the STARS program that seeks to adapt the curriculum for those children coming in where it is recognized that they are at these lower levels. It is to seek to address some of the shortfalls that they may have, which may be quite varied from student to student. But in terms of specialized remedial teachers at this point in time, no.
And one other aspect that came up from Mr. Simon, and I think it was highlighted by one or two other officials, deans and counselors are not full-time. Again, we all went to school and we know the importance of the discipline. Again, from my days to now, it has totally changed. And, we know of, we hear of counselors within a particular zone, and they identify for 3 or 5 schools, and they spend a certain time at this school today, and they don't visit the school tomorrow, and things like that. What is in the pipeline going forward with regards to ensure that we have counselors and deans full-time or attached to schools, something to ensure that discipline is maintained?
Mr. Chair, I would have indicated that in terms of what deans, what their portfolio is, it is a matter for the CPO to adjudicate on with discussion. And in terms of how our guidance officers and so on would be distributed among the schools, and especially schools where we have identified that there are major issues, I will ask our social work specialist, Ms. Roberts-Nana, to comment. Through you, Mr. Chair, of course.
Mr. Chair, with your permission, tutor will comment after, please.
Go ahead, Minister of Education.
Present, good morning, Mr. Chair. At present, there are 25 secondary schools in Port of Spain District, 23. 2 are private secondary schools. There are currently 11 school social workers which serve those schools, and 27 guidance officers, 2 of which are assigned to our learning enhancement centers.
Okay, thank you. Tutor, what aspect would you like to comment on?
Mr. Chair, the last 3 points raised by yourself and Senator Thompson-Naihe, please.
Okay, 2 minutes, please.
Right. In terms of the question put to the ministry as to the deans and the counselors being full-time, and yes, CEO indicated that that's a discussion for the CPO. It's a discussion between the CPO and tutor. Mr. Chair, what it will require is a change in the job description of the heads of department and deans to make them full-time, and therefore, in the first instance, the necessary compensation mechanisms to be awarded to them. Similarly, with all officers of student support services, we need to ensure that their job descriptions are finalized and we have the division properly staffed. Mr. Chair, in response to the issue of social workers and counselors at secondary, tutor wishes to suggest it might be more prudent once we have improved manpower to enhance that capacity at the primary level and improve students' performance and behavioral attitudes and situations there, so they will transition to secondary with fewer problems. Finally, Mr. Chair, in terms of Cantor and the rationalization of the CVQ results with those of CSEC, we want to urge that a holistic approach be taken to that, and that a public advocacy and public education campaign take place to ensure that the members of the public understand the equity that we are looking for. Thank you.
Okay. At this time, any members of the committee would like to intervene? Any comment, question, or feedback?
Through you, Mr. Chair, could I just add something to what Ms. Teka de Freitas just said? This is Ms. Petier.
One second. Yes, members, anyone would like to comment at this time? Members of the committee?
I would like to commend all of those who appeared before us, this morning. I think it was very instructive. And I hope that going forward, we'll be able to see something put in place to reward teachers who perform exceptionally well at their jobs, and also to weed out those teachers who are not contributing to the education of the children. I don't know if the assessment process of teachers is working well, because I would like to know if there's a way of seeing that there are schools that perform very well and they take full reward for the scholarships. But when you delve deeper and you talk to the children, they're telling you it is the private school teacher who has brought me to where I am. But the schools are taking full responsibility, and kudos when some of those teachers in those prestige schools as well are not performing well. So we need to be straightforward. We need to be honest. We need also to look to see exactly how we welcome children into our schools, especially children who come from disadvantaged neighborhoods. And I wish I had more time to speak to St. Anthony's problems, because I've sat in the court that now children court that used to be juvenile court, and I see too many children who are on suspension from St. Anthony's schools, and the probation officers and myself have spoken about it. So something is going on there. We need to be sure that we welcome children from all classes into our schools, that all of them are treated fairly. Because remember, it's not where you came from, but where you can go. So belief in the children, love for the children is paramount. If you don't love children, get out of the teaching profession, please.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Senator Aye. Mrs. Henry David, any feedback or comment?
Mr. Chair, my general comment is, Miss Thompson, Senator Thompson, he has me smiling, and yes, it is important that persons who go into the teaching profession look at it as not as a work, but as a profession where they influence the lives of children. They recognize how the way they interact with children can make or break their attitude towards education and towards school itself. And in the discussion this morning, a number of issues have been brought forward, and it would be instructive if, just as the committee has the benefit of the submissions of all of the stakeholders, that there would be some cross-fertilization, and we'll be able to get the information from each other, so that we can factor the opinions and recommendations of our stakeholders in education into the way we move forward, because education is and always will remain everybody's business. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Pitt, I can entertain you at this time.
Thank you, sir. I just wanted to thank Ms. Singh for her contribution concerning the CVQ. I'm happy to see that we're moving in that direction. And I'm happy because if this is a qualification that is being recognized by CARICOM's single market economy, then we should be able to give our children this opportunity to gain that qualification, number one, and then be able to have really good livelihoods as a consequence of that. Education, to me, it's all about life. It's all about having life skills. CVQs allow children to have assessment that is authentic. And I think that's the direction that education needs to be moving in. So that all well and good, a paper and pencil test is all well and good. But at the end of the day, can you do? And the CVQ simply says, I can do, or I can do up to this level, and then I move on to the next. So thank you very much, Ms. Singh, for sharing that with us. I really appreciate the fact that the effort is being made to have the qualification recognized as broadly as it possibly can. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Right, thank you, Ms. Pitt. At this time, I'd like to place the last question for discussion. The Association of Principals of Assisted Secondary Schools, in their submission, indicated that, and I quote, Interventions in schools with a high degree of at-risk students must include targeted training of teachers and adjustment in the class sizes to a realistic teacher/student ratio to facilitate individualized attention for students. And that is stated in the submission on page 4, paragraph 2. So again, to Mrs. Sonia Mahes-Prasad, all right, following questions that I would like you to generate for us, some answers. What is the average teacher-student ratio in classes? Secondly, in schools with a high number of at-risk students, should this ratio be adjusted? I have 2 more questions. So you want to give me the 2 questions one time, or you want to deal with those 2 at first?
I could deal with those 2, Chair.
Okay, proceed.
So when we look at the at-risk students, as was stated in our submission, we are looking at learners who have a higher probability of failing academically or dropping out of school. So we're looking at that definition of at-risk students. And students who fall into that category need specialized attention. In the case of the students in Form 1, most of them in that category would have attained under 50%, and in some cases under 30% at the SEA level, which is very worrying because then it points to very severe gaps that must be catered for if these students are to progress at the secondary level. And out of that comes the recommendation for smaller class sizes. Typically, we have a 35 students to 1 teacher ratio in most of our schools. In some cases, even more. In some cases, it's 40 students to a teacher ratio in some classes. An ideal class size would be for specialized work like this, 20 students a teacher, and even that may be a bit high, given the needs of these students for more individualized attention. 15 students to teacher, and a teacher being trained in specialized pedagogy to deal with these students' needs. That would be an ideal mechanism to actually provide the type of support that these students need. Otherwise, you will have a transition from Form 1 to Form 2 to Form 3, and at the end of 5 years, these students' value has not been added in a meaningful way to them through the education system. And in addition to that, the provision of the diagnostic specialists, there are so many learning challenges, not just the typical ones that we could recognize, like dyslexia and the ADHD. There are so many others right now that we do need the support of diagnostic specialists, especially with these at-risk students. And reading specialists, our CEO spoke about the fact that we don't have remedial teachers at the secondary level, and there is a need for specialized and remedial teachers to assist those students coming in with under 30% at the SEA and under 50% as well. So in addition to fill in, as we talk about the heads and deans posts, we also need these particular specialized type of teachers. And as I said, that smaller student to teacher ratio, so that these at-risk students can be provided with that targeted support.
And my question, my follow-up question, based on the comment that you gave us, in light of the ideal class scenario being 20 to 1, right, versus what we have at present, 35 students to 1 teacher, or even 40 students to 1 teacher, in going forward, right? I know the Ministry of Education may say that they are not in a position in order to bring down that figure where they can provide teachers in that instance. What recommendation can you put forward in light in going forward, how we can be able to deal with the situation?
I think we need to understand school context. While in some cases, a class with 35 students or a teacher, that could be a functional class in terms of the teacher being able to deliver the curriculum. We have to look, we have been talking about school context, and I keep talking about doing this personal profile of students when they enter the secondary school, where we look at their scores at the SEA, we look at their needs, their academic needs, and see what we need to provide. So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, whereas in some schools you could have bigger classes. In schools where we have identified a significant number of students who are in need of specialized attention, there we could look at the possibility of having those smaller classes. Given the economic constraints that may be facing the Ministry of Education, the need for more teachers and how quickly that could be done. That is one way to look at it. I would say the hybridized approach that we were all forced to adopt under COVID has given us some really useful online resources that are very useful for students with special needs, and maybe a look can be taken to using those online resources and providing more one-on-one attention for those students who will need that support as well. And that is where curriculum and additional training will be needed to see how best the teachers can utilize that. But I don't think we could get away from the fact that there are definitely schools where we will need to have smaller class sizes.
Okay.
While some could function with it as it is, there are many schools where those students will need that more individualized attention.
Could I get a feedback from Father Mendez and then also from Mr. Simon? Could I get some feedback here, please?
I agree with what Ms. Mahesh Prasad has said. What she's saying is not saying that you double the number of teachers in a school, quite the opposite. That where it is needed, a teacher be provided so that a teacher or two, depending on the size of the school and the number of students affected, so that the children can be properly catered to and catered for. Because otherwise, when a teacher is trying to deal with 35 or 40 children in a classroom, there's no way that they can give more than maybe once every month, if that, the individualized attention to children who need it. So I just want to underscore with what she has said, and I agree with it fully. Again, I recognize the ministry has their own limits on the number of people that they can hire and so on. I would also like to state that when you're talking about the deans and heads, what had happened when the original set of deans and heads came into a school, one teacher was provided for every 3 deans or heads of department so that they could have some time. But a dean teaching 5 periods out of 8 or 4 out of 7 certainly does not have the kind of time. So again, the constraints are with the ministry's ability to be able to hire more teachers. Totally understandable. They're limited in by costs, but those things need to be looked at a level way above ours, at a level of the Parliament, of the Cabinet, to look at it and see what needs to be done if we are going to have a truly successful educational system. Thank you.
Thank you, Father Mendez. Mr. Simon, brief comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to start by recognizing the contribution of the president of TTUTA. I think we need to have a very cohesive view of our education system. So some of the issues that we are raising, if we can have measures properly instituted from the primary schools, and that transition is going to be an easier one. The issue as well of supplying information from the primary school to the secondary school is something that needs to be improved upon and refined so that we work almost as an extension of one another, in that As someone coming into secondary school, the principal is well aware of what issues they are facing. Yes, I know there is the CUME card, but that CUME card system that we have is ineffective. It is not properly done. It is because it needs to be modernized in the first place. And that is something that we need to
Mr. Simon, 1 second. What card you said?
The cumulative record card. In education,
cumulative record card. Okay.
The CUME card.
Okay. Yes, we need to be conscious. Yes.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Then moving on, we spoke about, this is something that I really want to underscore, especially in light of the subject that we are discussing today. It was very pleasing to see that we went beyond the Port of Spain region and looking at performance in schools and not underachievement. I had real problems, and our association had real problems with the wording of the document in terms of what we were looking at. We much preferred the examination of the performance of our schools, not only in Port of Spain, but in Trinidad and Tobago. And it was very pleasing to see that our discussion really didn't focus on Port of Spain. Really, we examined national issues, which is what we must do. And just as I end, on that Port of Spain issue, imagine that we would have been hearing, as we look at our system, no remedial teachers, shortages in guidance officers and social workers. Is there any surprise then that the microscopic view of schools in some of the areas that have been highlighted as hotspots, etc., that the performances, the academic performances of these schools are going to be lagging behind some of the other schools where you have so much more support, not necessarily from the ministry or from anybody else, but from the other stakeholder groups, the past pupils associations, all of these other stakeholder groups that step in to fill the gap. What we need to do is to be, as was said, be very honest about our situation. And we must really recognize that we need to deconstruct the system that is in front of us and build it from scratch. Really, COVID has showed us that we can do it, because COVID caused us to be plunged into the unknown. And while we are still swimming against the tide, I think we are doing a very, very good job as a community. And that is what I would like to say, Mr. Chair, on that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Simon. Back to you, Mrs. Mahes Prasad. Do teachers in these schools receive training to treat with the additional attention required by high-risk students? That's one. And then the last question would be, what are the restorative practices for students in secondary schools which are underachieving? Again, I'd like Mrs. Mahes Prasad to start off, and then we'll also go to Father Mendez and also Mr. Simon. 2 minutes, please.
Chair, could you repeat the first question?
The first question, do teachers in these schools receive training to treat with the additional attention required by at-risk students? The at-risk students you talk about, do you all receive training with regards to that? Briefly.
That type of specialized training, unfortunately, is lacking. I think as a society, we probably need more personnel who access those types of training at the tertiary level and come back to their community to work within the school system. I get a sense that there is a shortage of that type of trained personnel who could now be part of the bigger education system. So know that it's a very specific type of training. While there might be some workshops to address certain remediation needs, it's not really that we were speaking about in our submission, because we do have severely at-risk students who would need trained teachers who could provide the targeted intervention that they require in order to progress.
Again, briefly, Father Mendez and Mr. Simon, and then I'll bring in the Ministry of Education.
Okay, Mr. Chair. our schools, all three of our schools, use the various days given by the ministry as professional development days to bring in psychologists and different people to speak to the staff and to try to do little workshops on trying to meet those needs. But you know, the ironic thing is that the people, the teachers who take their time off their days, and it's not 28 sick, it's 14 sick and 14 casual, will quite often take a casual day on the day that there's that professional development. What can be done about it? Very little. So, but at any rate, the attempt is made through the board and through the principals to have the professional development days where you bring in these kinds of people, psychologists and so on. We've even brought in SSS on different occasions to speak to the staff about this in the hope of trying to develop a way forward. Thank you.
Yes, thanks. Mr. Simon?
Chair, I would like to also agree with the two previous speakers. Definitely on a national level, I think we need to do so much more in terms of special needs, not only in education, but really in all aspects of our society. So yes, there can be a lot more to be done in terms of training. Yeah. But I must give the Ministry of Education some credit here, especially in light of what Father Mendez just spoke about, because the Ministry of Education has spent some time training us as leaders in our own schools. So as principals, we have been trained in terms of how we can proceed, how we can, as leaders, transformational leaders, utilize some of our limited resources to be able to help in those professional development days that we speak about. So as leaders, we have been provided with some degree of change mechanisms and systems that are allowing us to make minor differences within our schools and within the education system as a whole. However, I would like to concur with the view that definitely a lot more can be done on a national level, not only from the Ministry of Education, but in terms of us as a society, in terms of how we deal with special needs. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Simon, just a little follow-up of the three models you identified, right? The government schools, then we have the government-assisted model, and then we have the public-private management model, which is like the Bishop Trinity East, right, that you spoke about. With regards to the at-risk students, they are more prevalent in terms of those three models. Where would you identify the percentages of at-risk students? Where would you think it's more highly prevalent?
Let me first start by answering that question by saying, Mr. Chair, that every single school possesses at-risk students, right? Definitely. So that you are going to find that in every school. But if we are to be brutally honest, I think that's a rhetorical question, because the answer to that question, obviously, of the models, the government secondary schools are the schools. When we started the discussion, first and foremost, we spoke about the location of schools. You are going to find that many of the schools that you speak about are located in different areas. Many of the government, I shouldn't say many, but quite a few of the government schools are community-based schools. That is, they are located within communities. And the issues that we speak about that will speak to students who are at risk will be emanating from those communities. And many of those schools are government schools. The data that we would have supplied as well, Mr. Chair, would be a clear indication. As I said, I keep speaking about a microscopic view of the academic performance, and that microscopic view is going to point to differences in terms of the different models and the government school model. But let me reiterate that every single school has at-risk students, and the challenge is to bring those at-risk students to a point where they are going to be meaningful contributors to our society. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, colleagues. Mrs. Henry David, Ministry of Education, feedback on the discourse that we just had with regards to at-risk, right? The teachers to student ratio, the high number of at-risk students, and how if the ratio can be adjusted, and what is the ministry in going forward have to say about it?
Excuse me, Chair. I think there was one question you were asking me at the end there about interventions, and I just wanted to quickly answer. There were two questions you posed. Okay. So I just want to answer the second one very quickly. Okay. Okay. In terms of intervention. Sure. Taking off from what Mr. Simon spoke about, the ministry that provide training for principals to probably recognize some of these at-risk students and the characteristics, but there's a broad spectrum of at-risk students that we have to look at. Student Support Services Division and school social workers do provide some support, but I think they definitely need more staffing in order to attend to the needs of the schools. Alumni associations, a lot of schools tap into the resources, the human resources available within their alumni association. It is always good to build that sense of identification between past students and their schools so that they would want to give back. Giving back is a very important characteristic, I think, that we need to cultivate in our students. When they graduate, they're still part of the school community, and if they have a skill set to offer, come and give it back. Also, the Parent Teachers Association, sometimes we tap into that, and we pull parents who may have the resources, who may be able to assist with the at-risk students. It is also important to forge community links and have that school community link, that there's a sense of identification, so that corporate community members of the wider community that the school is located in will be able to come and provide some assistance and support for those at-risk students as well.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. Acting CEO, Ministry of Education, brief comments on what discourse we just had.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With respect to the issue of smaller class sizes, as indicated by those that would have spoken before me, it presents the issue of additional teachers in some cases, as well as additional physical space in which to accommodate the students. So at this point in time, with the number of students sitting the SEA exam annually increasing, what we would have to do is, as Ms. Mahes Prasad would have indicated, is to see how we can look at the online modalities and have and each individual schools would have to look at their staff, their staffing, and their spatial allocation to see how they can make changes within their individual context in order to treat with the issues presenting to them. We also moved to the topic of teacher training to treat with special needs students and identify. The ministry, as was indicated, does provide some level of training. The Student Support Services also augments that. And as Mr. Simon would have pointed out, as leaders, the principals bring in, and Mrs. Mahes Prasad as well, they bring in persons from the outside to augment what is provided by the ministry. And when we look at it, at that level, we recognize that it is a concerted effort across all of the stakeholders to try to treat with what concerns all of us. And the ministry will continue to provide support and to build on the training that is currently provided to see how best we can provide for our teachers to help them to treat with all the issues with which they are confronted. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, members. Right. I think we are at this junction now where we can bring the meeting to a close. Again, as the chairman, acting chairman for this morning proceedings, I would like to really thank all officials that were present here today, including the Ministry of Education, officials from the Ministry of Education, the Trinidad and Tobago United Teachers Association, TTUTA, Association of Principals of the Public Secondary Schools of Trinidad and Tobago, officials from the Association of Principals of Assisted Secondary Schools, and also officials, the Holy Ghost Fathers of Trinidad and Tobago. I would also like to thank all my committee members who participated remotely for this virtual meeting. I'd also like to thank staff of the Office of the Parliament for all the procedural and logistical support. And of course, we'd like to thank the viewing and listening audience this morning or this afternoon for this joint select parliamentary meeting. As the acting chairman, I now bring this meeting to a close, and I thank you.